The classroom hushed as the new arrival stepped through the threshold. Silence rippled like a shockwave, every conversation falling into abrupt stillness. Dozens of species, in various sizes, shapes, and colors, turned their attention to the tall, upright figure who entered without fanfare, eyes scanning the amphitheater with clinical precision. He wore no environmental suit, no translation device, no adaptive enhancements. Just a plain black uniform and a gaze that made cold-blooded species shiver. Jax Ward? Human. From Earth. The room shifted. Whispered murmurs followed him like an invisible cloak. That's him, from the Deathworld. They let one in? Are they mad? Jax took a seat near the rear, alone by design or by default. No one dared occupy the space around him. The tension didn't reach him. His breathing was slow. His posture straight. Expression unreadable. Professor Ilva, a translucent-bodied Mirdani with 8 gently waving tendrils, cleared her throat with a synthesizer-like buzz. Today, she announced, we welcome a new participant to Interstellar Cultural Studies. Mr. Jax Ward of Earth. A dozen appendages, claws, pseudopods, and feathered limbs attempted a polite greeting. Jax nodded once. The professor continued, her tone neutral but cautious. Earth is classified as a Category 5 death world. For academic clarity, a planet whose baseline conditions are hostile to most forms of life. Lethal megafauna. Unstable climates. Aggressive microbiota. Complex societal volatility. All documented. All fascinating. A student near the front raised a scaled hand. Is it true your species evolved among open-air predators? That you hunted while bleeding? Yes, Jax said simply. His voice was calm, almost quiet, yet somehow filled the room. Another student, bioluminescent and amphibious, leaned forward. Why would any species remain on a planet like that? Why not evacuate? Jax shrugged. We didn't have a choice. So we adapted. Laughter, light but sharp, rippled across the seating tiers. Not malicious, but incredulous. One avian student muttered. Adapted? More like barely survived. Jax glanced toward him but didn't respond. His silence said more than argument ever could. The professor tried to regain control. Mr. Ward, forgive the class? Few here have met a Deathworlder before. It's new. No offense taken, he said, adjusting his seat. We're used to it. A pause settled over the room. No one quite knew how to continue. Until Ilva gestured toward a demonstration unit in the corner, a gravitic manipulator used for stress testing alloys. Perhaps a shared demonstration, she suggested. This model weighs precisely 300 kilograms under station gravity. Not dangerous, but a useful example of non-assisted weight distribution. She turned expectantly to a student from Gractal, a species known for muscular development. With effort, the bulky quadruped managed to lift the module a few inches before setting it back down, panting. Applause fluttered politely. Jax stood without comment. Walked over. Squatted, wrapped his hands around the edges, and lifted. Smoothly. With no grunt. No visible strain. He held it at chest level for a moment, then gently returned it to the ground. The echo rang in the stunned silence that followed. He returned to his seat. Said nothing. Professor Ilva stared for a moment longer than necessary. I see the gravity compensation may require recalibration, she said softly. Nobody laughed. In the quiet that followed, a feline hybrid student exhaled slowly. How did your kind survive that place for millennia? Jax's eyes didn't blink. Because extinction wasn't an option. Another silence, heavier this time. The lecture continued, but focus was fractured. Questions hovered in every mind, about Earth, about humans, about what it took to walk calmly through a galaxy that had already labeled your homeworld uninhabitable. Jax sat still, listening. Not fidgeting. Not reacting. Only watching. Measuring. By the end of the hour, nobody sat near him. But nobody laughed anymore either. And across 100 light years, stories had begun to spread, of the quiet human from the Deathworld, who spoke little, lifted mountains, and looked at danger as if it owed him respect. When Jax's turn came to present, he didn't use visuals. No holograms, no dramatic projections. Just stood before the room, hands behind his back, and began to speak. Earth is not hostile by choice, he said. It simply doesn't care whether you survive. The room was quiet. Some expected a lecture. Others expected bravado. What they received was an unfiltered truth none had anticipated. Our gravity is high. Almost 1 g by your standards. Enough to make your muscles ache and your joints beg. Our atmosphere is a mix of nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and occasional doses of sulfur, smoke, and ash, especially during seasonal wildfires. The temperatures swing from freezing to boiling depending on where you stand. Hurricanes, droughts, floods, lightning storms that kill hundreds a year. That's our weather. A few students shifted in their seats. Jax didn't pause. Life there evolved with fangs, venom, claws. Some creatures kill for food. Others for territory. Some just to reduce competition. Apex predators hunt in packs. Poisonous insects burrow into flesh. Parasites hijack nervous systems. Microorganisms mutate faster than we can study them. Entire civilizations collapsed from single diseases. He looked at no one in particular, but every student felt as if he spoke directly to them. We didn't rise because we were the strongest. We rose because we adapted faster than anything else. We heal from wounds most species can't imagine. We live through infections that mutate hourly. We regulate our own body temperature. We can track prey over days, never stopping, because we don't overheat. We cooperate under threat. We compete under pressure. We suffer, we learn, and we keep moving. He told them about early humans, hunting with stone tools, walking barefoot across burning sand and freezing ice. How they worked together to trap predators twice their size. How they buried their dead with rituals before they even understood language. He spoke of volcanoes that darkened skies for years. Earthquakes that split cities. Plagues that wiped out generations. Famines that twisted nations. And through every disaster, humanity endured, not with perfection, but with relentless motion. He recalled a personal story, not with emotion, but with precision. When I was 9, a wildfire tore through the outer valleys. Our home was in its path. Evacuation transport broke down. My mother got us into a basement tunnel. The air turned black. We rationed oxygen. Waited 13 hours before emergency crews cut us out. I watched the ceiling glow red. Felt the air boil. I still dream about it. But I remember this, we stayed calm, we planned, we lived. No embellishment. No heroism. Just survival. The kind that left a mark no technology could erase. A student in the back asked, hesitantly, "But you still speak of it with respect?" Jax answered without delay. Because Earth taught us everything. Pain is instruction. Threat is clarity. And surviving it gave us discipline. Our planet isn't cruel. It's honest. Murmurs spread through the room. One student whispered that Earth sounded like a prison. Another called it a crucible. Jax finished simply. We didn't choose hardship. But we learned not to fear it. The professor, who had heard thousands of species describe their origin worlds in glorious, serene detail, didn't interrupt. There was nothing left to clarify. Every student present now understood that humans weren't forged by civilization. They were shaped long before it. Sculpted by starvation, hunted by shadows, tested by a world that never once paused for weakness. And yet, despite it all, they had climbed, built, flown, reached. Not in spite of their world, but because of it. Jax returned to his seat without looking for approval. None was needed. In the silence that followed, no one raised their hand. No one questioned the truth. The galaxy had heard of Deathworlds. Now, for the first time, it truly understood what it meant to survive one. Tension grew after Jax's presentation. Respect had replaced mockery, but admiration wasn't universal. Some viewed his calm recounting of survival as arrogance. Especially Korik, a Zarn student bred on a militarized colony. His species valued physical power above all. To him, endurance was not strength, it was submission. During a debate on species conflict resolution, Korik interrupted. You speak of endurance as if it's dominance. It's not. True strength is taking control, not waiting to survive. His tone was sharp, challenge unmistakable. Jax met his gaze unfazed. Survival isn't waiting. It's choosing not to die while building the strength to change the outcome. The room tensed. Jax didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. There was no posturing, no visible pride, just fact. The professor, sensing the rising friction, redirected the conflict. Perhaps a practical comparison would offer clarity. We'll hold a cultural endurance exercise. A fair sequence. Mental, physical, and environmental challenges. No aggression. No combat. Students volunteered. Every major species present sent one. Jax gave a simple nod. No protest. The first test involved temperature variation. A sealed chamber mimicked environmental extremes, scorching desert heat followed by sub-zero cold. Participants were monitored for physiological and psychological response. Some dropped out within minutes. One went into shock. Jax stayed upright, focused, adjusting his breathing. At -30 degrees, he slowed his movements. At 48 degrees, he drank water sparingly and slowed his heart rate through meditation. He exited with normal vitals. The second task tested cognitive function under physical duress. Problem solving while on a treadmill under G-force variation. Most participants made mistakes under stress. Jax completed every sequence. His answers were brief, precise. He didn't stumble once. Korik performed well, but his frustration grew. He hadn't expected the human to be so composed under pressure. What angered him more was Jax's restraint. No gloating, no competition, just results. The final phase simulated oxygen deprivation. The chamber dropped to 10% atmospheric oxygen. Most alien species couldn't last more than 4 minutes. Some withdrew preemptively. Jax remained seated, conserving breath, pulse steady. 7 minutes passed before he exited unaided. He later explained that humans trained for this regularly. Earth's mountain ranges reached altitudes where oxygen dropped below survival thresholds. Athletes used it to increase lung efficiency. Soldiers used it to learn focus under stress. Korik exited at 4 minutes, eyes bloodshot, chest heaving. He didn't speak. After the trials, the scores were posted. Jax ranked first in all 3 categories. The room didn't applaud. There was no celebration. Just silence, heavy and thoughtful. Many had assumed Earth's dangers were its defining feature. Now they realized Earth's greatest legacy was how its people prepared. Not for glory. Not for pride. But because they had no alternative. Later, in the study hall, Korik approached. His tone was no longer mocking. You don't act like a warrior. Yet you outperformed every one of us. Jax answered without insult. Because Earth never gave us time for ego. It just gave us pain. We learned to respect it, work through it, and stay alive. That was enough. Korik paused. You could have humiliated us. You didn't. Jax shrugged. Not my purpose. Korik left without another word. Word of the results spread through the station. The Zarn were known for physical excellence. The Myrr valued logic. The Lethari worshipped emotional resilience. All were surpassed, not by showmanship, but by silent discipline. Jax never referred to the trial again. He didn't act differently. He continued his studies, sat alone, spoke only when addressed. But everything around him shifted. No longer was he just a human from the Deathworld. He had become a benchmark. A reminder. Proof that surviving the impossible wasn't luck. It was choice, preparation, and mindset. And for the first time, the others began to understand why Earth hadn't needed conquest or technology to be feared. It had only needed to survive. and those it sent into the stars carried that truth in their bones. Weeks passed. The tension in the classroom faded, replaced by something deeper, curiosity. Jax no longer needed to prove himself. He'd become a point of study, a living artifact of extreme survival. Students now approached with questions they hadn't dared ask before. One, from a species known for neural sensitivity, asked how humans handled emotional trauma. "Our species enters hibernation cycles to cope with loss," she explained. "What do humans do?" Jax didn't hesitate. "We mourn, then move. Grief is part of the process, not a place to stay." Another asked about isolation. "Earth sounds chaotic. How did your kind avoid madness in such danger?" "We didn't always. But we learned that solitude isn't silence. It's space to rebuild. We used art, movement, writing. And when that failed, we helped each other stand again." A third, fascinated by violence, asked why humans waged war so often. Jax's expression didn't shift. "We didn't always understand what we were. Fear, greed, power, they're not unique to us. But we're unique in how far we'll go to correct our mistakes. We don't stop at regret. We build better systems, and if they fail, we try again." The room absorbed his answers, but they wanted more. Not theory, truth. They asked about the worst parts. Jax obliged. He described starvation. Not abstract famine, but the kind where children fight over scraps and parents fake fullness so the young can eat. He talked about nuclear disasters, where cities vanished and survivors walked through ash without knowing if they'd live another week. He mentioned civil wars that turned neighbor against neighbor, and yet from that ruin, nations emerged stronger, wiser. He explained that Earth didn't teach mercy. It taught consequence. And from consequence, humanity learned responsibility. Every mistake had cost. Every lesson had blood behind it. But the knowledge remained. A professor asked him directly, "What does humanity fear now, after surviving such a planet?" "Complacency," Jax answered. "That's what kills progress. Not fire. Not teeth. Not war. It's thinking you've done enough when there's still more to fix." That answer spread across forums, quoted in academic circles. Not for its eloquence, but for its simplicity. Later, a minor systems failure struck the station. Not critical, but enough to cause panic. Oxygen regulation dropped, artificial gravity destabilized. Most students fled to the inner chamber protocols. Jax didn't. While others secured their quarters, he helped stabilize life support relays, manually restored backups, and patched coolant leaks with improvised tools. No command. No orders. He simply moved, identified problems, and solved them. Afterward, station administrators reviewed the incident logs. Jax's name appeared in every recovery point. His reaction time exceeded protocol. His efficiency surpassed trained responders. When asked how he remained so calm under threat, he answered, "Because panic doesn't stop pressure. Thinking does." It wasn't heroism. He didn't look for praise. He didn't tell anyone what he'd done. Others noticed on their own. For many students, that moment became the first time they considered redefining strength, not as dominance or intellect, but as composure. Word filtered through other halls, to different departments. Stories emerged, not exaggerated, but consistent. The human didn't flinch. He adapted, reacted, and carried on. Some started seeking him out not to test him, but to learn. How to endure failure. How to stay focused under stress. How to prepare for what they couldn't predict. One day, a young cadet from a species known for fragility asked, "How do you not break?" Jax replied, "Everything breaks. The point is learning how to rebuild." He didn't offer comfort. He gave structure. Soon, a quiet pattern formed. Those who struggled went to him. Not for sympathy, but for method. He became a silent counselor, not emotional, but exact. People left steadier, clearer, not because he solved their pain, but because he showed them how to endure it. No titles. No ranks. Just earned gravity. In a galaxy full of species who never truly known fear, pain, or pressure, the human wasn't a warrior or savior. He was a living reminder. Survival wasn't a gift. It was a habit, forged by hardship, mastered through clarity. And those who once feared him now sought to understand him, not because they wanted to be him, but because they wanted to learn what Earth had taught him to become. The final phase of the program required each student to submit a capstone, a contribution to the cultural database meant to represent their species' core philosophy. Most created intricate digital presentations, animated histories, or poetic monologues reflecting centuries of tradition. Jax submitted a single document, 4,000 words, no visuals. Just text. Title: Lessons from the Edge. When asked why it lacked embellishment, he answered plainly, "What's important doesn't need decoration." Faculty reviewed it first. Then students. Soon, translations circulated across departments. The document wasn't a declaration of superiority. It was a practical guide. Each section began with a principle, followed by real-world human experiences. Adaptation through stress. Coordination under chaos. Emotional regulation during loss. Decision-making under threat. Every entry described moments not of triumph, but of survival, each decision, each failure, each adjustment. It wasn't inspirational. It was instructional. Jax wrote about a soldier who disarmed a bomb after losing both hands. A nurse who stayed behind during a viral outbreak, knowing it meant her death. An engineer who built water purifiers from scrap for villages cut off by floods. Not famous names. Not heroes. Just people who made choices under pressure. Other students began referencing the material in their own projects. They weren't romanticizing humanity, they were extracting principles. Not how to dominate, but how to endure, adapt, improve, and carry others forward. A lecture on societal collapse featured an excerpt from the document. Asterisk. When everything breaks, rebuild small first. Strength isn't regaining the tower. It's holding the first brick with steady hands. Asterisk. Another discussion on fear highlighted. Asterisk. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the refusal to obey it. Asterisk. The station's leadership eventually requested Jax to present the core principles in person to a cross-species delegation. He declined a podium. He stood at floor level, spoke without flourish, just clarity. Earth didn't give us strength. It forced us to build it. Every crisis was a class. Every loss a lesson. We learned not to resist difficulty, but to sharpen ourselves against it. We weren't chosen. We weren't lucky. We just refused to stop. He finished without fanfare. No applause followed. Just quiet understanding. Later, one of the station's artificial intelligence units analyzed cultural response metrics. Engagement around the human capstone exceeded all others combined. Not from awe, but from utility. People didn't react with admiration, they reacted with application. Station staff began running resilience workshops based on human methodology. Emergency simulations now included psychological stabilization patterns sourced from Earth training protocols. Tactical academies began integrating Earth case studies into officer preparation, not for combat, but for crisis leadership. Jax never sought credit. He didn't change his routine. While others debated policy, he reviewed systems, studied silently, trained with consistency. No new demeanor. No shift in behavior. His presence didn't grow louder. It simply grew heavier, anchored by earned value. Eventually, the cultural program ended. Each participant returned to their homeworld or was assigned to advanced placements. Jax received no ceremony. Just a quiet departure log and a transfer record to a diplomatic support division. But his absence marked the halls. Not by noise, but by the gap left behind when quiet weight is removed. Students still referred to him, not as an anomaly, but as a framework. Faculty reshaped some criteria for future cultural exchanges. Not because Jax had outperformed others, but because he changed the definition of performance. His lessons lived on in quiet adjustments. A student taking longer to breathe before reacting. Another choosing structure over panic. Entire departments began placing higher value on psychological readiness, not just intelligence or speed. Humanity had not come to impress. It had come to contribute. Jax never claimed humanity was special. He only showed what was possible when pressure became purpose. In doing so, he redefined strength, not as destruction, not as dominance, but as sustained clarity in the face of failure. In a galaxy filled with civilizations shaped by peace, tradition, or control, one human from a chaotic planet showed them how to survive the worst, and still remain useful. Not by chance. Not by conquest. But by learning how to stand, when standing was all that remained.